You can call me stupid. You can call me ugly. You can call me easy. But don't call me a boomer. I'm so tired of these millennial types. Calling Gen Xers boomers. So that's what do you know. I mean, I know there's a little bit of confusion, but they have a generation things, but I think they should have figured this one out. But I don't think the people have thought about it. I think there is some confusion actually with Generation X because what they don't seem to realize is that Generation X is one of those generations where divorce was at an all-time high in the United States, and the parents were a lot older than the generations before or after. For some reason, we had that seems not all of them, but there were a lot older. My parents, a perfect example. I'm saying what makes me strange as far as a boomer. Why is it strange? Well, here, for example, with the generational thing gets weird. My grandfather, for example, was born over 120 years ago. And, I'm just over 50. Seems like a long time, doesn't it? My grandfather? Yeah, born over 120 years ago. In fact, a lot of my relatives, not that he lived that long, he didn't. He was 67 or something, he died, although I never met him, so there you go. But my grandma was born, all my grandparents were born before 1910. Okay? Like my other grandfather was born in Italy, Sicily in 1908. Grandmother in 1906. Okay? You see what I'm getting at? My parents and grandparents lived longer. They were older when they had kids. They had more kids, so they were older when they had some kids. Like my mother had 4 kids, and she lost one in a miscarriage. I was the last one. So I was the baby. I was born in 1971, and that makes me a Gen X, not a boomer. Okay, the last boomers were born in like 1956, 1957, somewhere around there. And then maybe 58 you could squeeze. And then right around there, it's turned into Generation X. I have a friend who was born in 1962. He's definitely not a boomer. Okay, and I have another friend who was born in 56. And he's definitely a boomer. Okay, he fits in the boomer. He was in college in Italy in the 70s. Him, the 50s and the 60s were like his childhood. My other friend was born in 62. His childhood was the 70s. He went to graduate high school and went to the military in the 80s. Not the same thing with me. I was in high school in the 80s. Okay, old boomers went to high school in the 80s. Okay, maybe a couple of them might have started high school in the late 70s, but pretty much the 80s was kind of like that teen to adulthood era for boomers. Okay, for Generation X. For boomers, it was the 60s. Okay, the 60s into the early 70s. It's a big difference. But what is different is that, like, my parents were born before World War II, and that's what screws people up. It's a lot of, some people like me, my parents also were a little bit older. When my mother was 33 when she had me, which at that time was relatively old. And I was the last one, last child. Like I said, she had a miscarriage and then she had me, which is why I was a baby, because, miscarriages for women are tough. Anyway, make a long story short. So she wasn't young when she had me. My parents did get divorced in the 70s, and divorce was a big thing among boomers. They were the divorce generation. My parents were like the first ones on the block to get a divorce. They were like, they were among Catholics in Brooklyn. They're like, oh, your parents are divorced. Yeah, damn. But my point is, boomers are hippies. Okay, straight hippies. Pretty much. My parents weren't even hippies, but they fit into that generation. My father went to a monastery, become a monk, but he didn't. He opted out. True story. I mean, his brothers both one became a deacon, one became a priest, and then he married a nun. True story. And then they left, obviously left the Catholic Church. But you see what I'm saying? The Irish are crazy, religion. Anyway, long story short, that's boomers. That was. But see, that was a leftover from the generation before, which is what makes my parents kind of like a crossover. They were had some things left over from the generation before. That's why they weren't hippies. But they still kind of caught onto that tail end of that generation. That generation started in the 30s, the mid 1930s. And it finished It almost started in actually 1930, I would say, believe it or not. And then it finished in the mid 50s, mid to late 50s. And my generation started in the mid to late 50s and it finished by 1980. The millennials started in 1980 and they finished in the early 2000s. But what concept are people getting about this? You know, I mean, I'm not a fucking boomer. You know, I'm gonna say I'm not a damn boomer. So that's all I'm gonna say. Generation X are not boomers. Okay, millennials. Carl. No. All right.